The sun had not yet broken over the Montana horizon when Joseph Reed guided his horse down the frozen trail toward home. December 20th, 1883. The kind of morning where breath turned to ice crystals before it left your lungs, where the cold didn't just bite it, burrowed deep into your bones and made a home there. Negative 25 degrees, the thermometer had read when Joe left Silver Creek an hour before dawn. He'd learned long ago that the coldest part of winter wasn't the temperature, it was the loneliness. His ranch sat 8 miles outside town, far enough that neighbors were a concept more than a reality. The land stretched out in every direction, white and endless, beautiful, in the way that dangerous things often are. Joe had built this life with his wife Ellen back when Montana Territory still felt like a promise instead of a memory. That was before the tuberculosis took her 2 winters ago, before the silence of the house became louder than any sound he'd ever heard. The horse slowed as they approached the property line where the old wooden mailbox stood like a sentinel against the empty plains. Joe had carved that post himself back in '79, Ellen watching with her hands on her hips and that smile that could warm a man straight through. The horse snorted a sharp sound in the still air and planted its hooves in the snow. "Easy now," Joe murmured, but the animal refused to move forward. That's when he saw it. At first his mind tried to make sense of the shape slumped against the mailbox post. A pile of rags, maybe. Someone's abandoned bundle. But then the bundle moved just slightly and a sound escaped from it. Soft, broken, barely human. Joe dismounted in an instant, his boots crunching through the frozen crust of snow. The cold forgotten now, replaced by something hotter and more urgent. Anger. The kind that starts in your gut and spreads like wildfire. A girl. Young, maybe 15, maybe younger. Hard to tell with the frost coating her dark hair, with the way her brown skin had gone gray with cold. She was bound to the post with rough rope, the kind used for cattle, tied so tight it had cut through the thin fabric of her dress. Her legs were twisted beneath her at an angle that told Joe immediately something was wrong. They didn't move when he approached, didn't flinch away. But her eyes. Those eyes were alert, watching him with the wariness of a trapped animal deciding whether to fight or surrender to death. Pinned to her chest with a bent nail was a scrap of paper. Joe pulled it free with trembling fingers, though whether from cold or rage he couldn't say. A gift for the soft-hearted rancher. Keeper or freezer? Friends. Friends. The word tasted like poison in his mind. Joe looked around the empty road, half expecting to see figures watching from the tree line, waiting to see what he'd do. There was nothing but wind and snow and the weak light of dawn trying to break through the clouds. He crouched down, making himself small, making himself less threatening. The girl's eyes tracked his every movement. "Easy now," he said again, the same tone he'd used with the horse. "I've got you. You're safe." She didn't understand the words, he could tell, but she understood something in his voice. The tension in her small frame eased just a fraction. Joe pulled his knife from his belt, watched her eyes go wide, then carefully, so carefully, began to cut the rope. They fell away one strand at a time, leaving angry red marks on her wrists and shoulders. When the last binding came free, her body sagged forward, and Joe caught her, surprised by how light she was. Like holding a bird. Like holding something that shouldn't have survived but somehow did. She clung to his coat with fingers so cold they'd gone past pain into numbness. Joe wrapped her in his heavy fur coat, the one Ellen had saved 2 years to buy him for Christmas. He mounted the horse one-handed, cradling the girl against his chest, and turned toward home. The ride back felt longer than it was. Every moment Joe expected to feel her go still, to feel that terrible absence that meant he'd been too late. But she held on. Her breath, shallow and quick, fogged against his shirt. Held on. The ranch house looked small against the vast white emptiness, smoke curling from the chimney where he'd left the fire banked. Joe carried her inside, kicked the door shut behind them, and went straight to the fireplace. He built up the flames until they roared, until heat filled the room like a living thing. Only then did he set her down near the hearth on the pile of blankets he kept by the fire for cold nights. Her dress was soaked through ice crystals clinging to the fabric. Joe knew hypothermia when he saw it. Knew it killed quick and quiet if you didn't act faster. He worked with practiced efficiency the same way he'd tended injured animals, the same way he'd cared for Ellen when the fever got bad. He pulled off the wet dress, replaced it with one of his warm flannel shirts that hung on her like a tent, wrapped her in dry blankets, never once looking at anything but her face, giving her what dignity he could in a situation that had stolen most of it already. Her eyes followed him the whole time, dark brown, almost black, set in a face that would have been pretty if it wasn't so hollowed out by hunger and fear. Joe heated water over the fire, added honey from the jar Ellen had kept by the stove. When he brought it to the girl's lips, she drank. Slowly at first, then more eagerly, though her hands shook too badly to hold the cup herself. "Good," Joe said softly. "That's good. You're a fighter." She finished half the cup before her eyes started to drift closed, the warmth and safety finally overwhelming the adrenaline that had kept her conscious. Joe sat back on his heels, watching her breathe, watching color slowly return to her cheeks. The sun was fully up now, weak winter light filtering through the windows. Joe stood his knees protesting and looked down at the girl sleeping by his fire. Someone had done this to her. Someone had tied a child to a post in killing cold and left her there like garbage. The anger came back colder than the temperature outside. But beneath it was something else. Something that felt almost like purpose, like the universe had put this broken thing in his path for a reason. Ellen used to say that God never gave you more than you could carry, but sometimes he gave you exactly what you needed to carry to remember why you kept going. Joe walked to the window, looked out at the mailbox standing in the distance. The rope still hung from it, dark against the snow. He'd leave it there, he decided. A reminder of what had been done, of what he wouldn't let happen again. When he turned back, the girl was watching him again. Still wary, still uncertain, but something had shifted in her gaze, something that looked almost like trust. By mid-morning, Joe had made soup from the rabbit he'd shot 2 days prior. Simple fare, but hot and nourishing. The girl ate slowly, carefully, like someone who'd learned that food wasn't always a given. She sat propped against the stone hearth, the blankets pulled tight around her shoulders. Joe pulled a chair close, but not too close, and sat down with his own bowl. They ate in silence for a long moment before he tried again. "I'm Joe," he said, touching his chest. "Joe Reed." She looked at him but didn't respond. He tried again, slower. "Joe," pointed to himself, then gestured to her with a questioning look. Still nothing. But her eyes were intelligent, assessing. She understood he was asking something even if she didn't know how to answer. Joe let it go, pushed his luck with a different approach. "I'm not much of a cook, I'll grant you that. My wife Ellen, she used to say my cooking could make a coyote cry." He said it deadpan, the way he'd said it 100 times before when Ellen was alive and something unexpected happened. The corner of the girl's mouth twitched, just barely, the ghost of a smile. Joe felt something in his chest loosen. "So you do understand English?" he said, his own smile breaking through. "Good to know." This time the smile reached her eyes just for a second before the wariness returned. They finished eating in a more comfortable silence. Joe collected the bowls, set them aside, then returned to his chair. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, keeping his posture open and unthreatening. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said quietly, "and I'm not going to make you talk before you're ready. But when you are ready, I'd like to know your name." She watched him for a long moment. Then, so quietly he almost missed it, she spoke. "Ayasha." Her voice was rough from disuse and cold, but the word was clear. Joe repeated it, trying to match her pronunciation, and got it wrong the first time. "Ayasha." She shook her head, said it again. "Ayasha." "Ayasha," Joe repeated, getting it right this time. "That's a strong name. Pretty, too." Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile, but close. A softening. "Ayasha," Joe said again, committing it to memory. Welcome to my home." It was then that he noticed she hadn't moved her legs once since he'd brought her inside. They lay at an odd angle beneath the blanket, and when he'd carried her, they'd been dead weight. "Your legs," he said gently. "Can you move them?" Ayasha looked down, and for the first time he saw real fear cross her face. She tried. He could see the effort in her body, the strain. But nothing happened. Her right leg especially remained still as stone. Joe kept his expression neutral, his voice calm. "All right, that's all right. We'll figure it out." He stood, moved to the corner where he kept his coat and hat. "I'm going into town to fetch the doctor. I'll be back before dark. There's food by the fire, and if you need anything at all, you just stay put. I'll only be a few hours." Ayasha watched him prepare to leave with something like panic in her eyes. Joe paused at the door, looked back at her. "I'm coming back," he said firmly. "I promise you that. I'm coming back." Then he was gone out into the cold, leaving her alone in his house with his food and his trust. It was a test in a way, not of her, but of himself. Could he really do this? Could he take on the responsibility of another person, another life, when he'd barely managed to keep going after Ellen died? The ride to Silver Creek took an hour. The town was small, barely more than a main street, with a few buildings clustered around it like sheep, huddling for warmth. Joe tied his horse outside Doc Carlson's office and pushed through the door without knocking. Henry Carlson looked up from his desk where he'd been reading a medical journal by lamplight. He was a lean man in his 50s with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed very little. "Joe Reed," he said, surprised. "Don't often see you in town twice in 1 week. Need you to come out to my place, Doc. Got a girl who needs looking at." Carlson's eyebrows went up. "A girl?" "Found her tied to my mailbox this morning. Left there to freeze. She's got some injury to her legs, can't seem to move them right. Need you to tell me what we're dealing with." The doctor was already reaching for his coat. "How old?" 15, maybe. Hard to say. She's Apache, I think, based on her features. Don't speak much English or doesn't want to." They were outside now, Carlson throwing his medical bag into his buggy. "You know who did it?" Joe's jaw tightened. "Got some ideas, but no proof, yet." The ride back was quiet, both men lost in their own thoughts. When they arrived at the ranch, Joe half expected to find Ayasha gone, run off into the winter despite her injuries. But she was still there, exactly where he'd left her, watching the door with those dark, alert eyes. Doc Carlson approached slowly, introduced himself in the gentle voice he used with frightened patience. Ayasha watched him with suspicion, but when Joe nodded encouragingly, she allowed the examination. The doctor was thorough and careful, asking Joe to translate his questions as best he could. When he finished, he sat back on his heels with a thoughtful expression. "The right leg below the knee. Nerve damage significant. Could be from an old injury, a fall maybe, or trauma. The left leg seems functional, just weak from disuse. With exercise and care, she might regain some mobility. The right leg, I can't promise anything. But she's young. Bodies at that age can heal in ways that surprise us." Joe felt something unclench in his chest. Not hopeless then. Not completely. What does she need? Time, food, safety. Physical therapy, though, we don't call it that out here. Help her build strength, teach her to use what she's got. And patience, Joe. A lot of patience. After the doctor left, Joe returned to find Ayasha looking at him with a question in her eyes. "He says you can get stronger," Joe told her. "Says with work you might walk again. Some at least. But it'll take time." She nodded slowly, processing this. Then she did something that surprised him. She pointed to the map of Montana Territory hanging on the wall, then made a motion with her hands, drawing shapes in the air. Joe walked to the window, watched her reflection in the glass as she continued to gesture. Then understanding dawned. She wanted to show him something. He grabbed a piece of charcoal from the fireplace, a sheet of paper from his desk, brought them to her, and waited. Ayasha drew carefully. A sun, mountains, a figure. Then she pointed south and west. "Arizona," Joe said. "You're from Arizona Territory. Apache lands." She nodded, and for the first time he saw her smile, really smile, because he understood, because someone was finally listening. "That's smart," Joe said, genuinely impressed. "Real smart. You're going to teach me a thing or two, aren't you?" She looked at him, seemed to gather her courage, then spoke again. "Ayasha." She pointed to herself, then haltingly in careful English. "Little one." Joe felt his throat tighten. "Little one," he repeated. "That's what your name means." She nodded. "It's perfect," he said. "Just perfect." They spent the rest of the afternoon in a tentative dance of communication. Joe would point to objects, say their names. Ayasha would repeat her pronunciation, improving with each attempt. When he brought out the crutch he'd made for himself years ago when his bad leg acted up, she understood immediately what he was offering. The attempt to stand was painful to watch. She got herself upright using the crutch and the edge of the hearth, her face tight with concentration and pain. She managed to hold herself there for maybe 20 seconds before her strength gave out, and Joe had to catch her. But she'd done it. She'd stood. "That's enough for today," Joe said gently, settling her back onto the blankets. "Rome wasn't built in a day, as Ellen used to say." Ayasha looked at the photograph on the mantel, the one of Ellen in her Sunday best, smiling at the camera, with that warmth that could light up a room. "Ellen," Ayasha said carefully, pointing to the picture. "My wife," Joe said. "She died 2 years back. Tuberculosis. She was the best person I ever knew." He didn't expect Ayasha to understand all the words, but she seemed to grasp the meaning. She looked at the picture, then at Joe, and very gently she reached out and touched his hand. Just a brief touch there and gone. But it said everything. "I understand loss. I understand grief. We are the same, you and I." As the sun began to set, painting the snow outside in shades of orange and gold, Joe built up the fire and started preparing dinner. Simple beans and cornbread, but filling. They ate together in comfortable silence, the kind that exists between people who've shared something profound, even if they can't quite name it yet. It was then that they heard it. The sound of horses outside. Multiple horses moving slow and deliberate. Ayasha's entire body went rigid. Joe saw the fear slam back into her eyes, raw and immediate. Whatever had happened to her, whoever had done it, the sound of horses meant danger in her mind now. Joe moved to the window, careful to stay out of sight. 3 men on horseback stopping near the mailbox. He couldn't see their faces in the dying light, but he could see them looking toward the house, looking and waiting. Then they turned and rode away, slow and unhurried, like they had all the time in the world. Joe's hand went to the rifle above the door, checking that it was loaded. He didn't look at Ayasha, didn't want to confirm her fear, but he could feel her watching him. "It's all right," he said, more to convince himself than her. "They're gone now. We're safe." But as he settled in his chair by the fire, his rifle across his lap, Joe knew that wasn't quite true. They'd come looking. They'd seen the smoke from his chimney, known someone was home, known their gift had been found. This wasn't over. It was only beginning. In town, in a warm office above the general store, Reverend Silas Blackwood sat behind an oak desk and smiled. The kind of smile that never reached the eyes. Across from him, Clem Hodges shifted his weight from foot to foot, uncomfortable in the presence of a man of God. "You left the girl at Reed's place like I instructed?" Blackwood asked, his voice smooth as honey. "Yes, sir, Reverend. Tied her up good and proper. But I don't understand. She's just a crippled Indian. Why bother?" Blackwood steepled his fingers, regarding the younger man with patient condescension. "Because my simple friend Joe Reed is a man of honor. Painfully so. He'll take the girl in. He won't be able to help himself. And when he does, this town will turn on him faster than you can spit. A white man harboring a savage in Montana territory. The good people of Silver Creek won't stand for it. And then when Reed is desperate and alone, when even his friends have abandoned him, he'll sell me that worthless patch of land he calls a ranch. For whatever price I name." Clem scratched his head. "But why do you want his land?" "It's just rock and snow 8 months of the year." Blackwood's smile widened. He opened a drawer, pulled out a chunk of rock that glittered in the lamplight. Gold ore, pure and rich. "Because beneath that rock and snow, my friend, is more gold than you or I could spend in 3 lifetimes. Reed doesn't know it. Nobody knows it but me and the surveyor I paid very well to keep quiet. That land is worth a fortune, and I intend to have it." Clem whistled low. "And the girl is merely a means to an end. By the time we're done, Joe Reed will wish he'd never stopped at that mailbox. He'll wish he'd kept riding and let nature take its course." Blackwood stood moved to the window, looked out at the dark street below. "Tomorrow you start spreading the word. Make sure everyone knows Reed's got an Indian girl out there. Make sure they understand what that means. Can't have savages thinking they're welcome here, can we? Not with all the trouble they've caused." "No, Sir Reverend," Clem agreed, though his tone suggested he didn't quite follow the logic. "Good man. Now go. We have work to do." After Clem left, Blackwood returned to his desk and poured himself 2 fingers of whiskey, the good stuff imported from Kentucky. He raised the glass to his reflection in the window. "To opportunity," he murmured, "and to fools who can't resist playing hero." He drank deep, already planning his next move, already counting his future gold. 8 miles away, Joe Reed sat by his fire with a rifle in his lap and a scared girl sleeping nearby. He didn't know about the gold, didn't know about Blackwood's scheme. All he knew was that someone had hurt this child, and that same someone clearly wasn't done. But Joe Reed had survived a war, had survived grief, had survived 2 Montana winters alone in a house too full of ghosts. He could survive this too. And more than that, he could make sure Ayesha survived it. Whatever it took, however long it took. Outside, the temperature dropped another 10 degrees. Inside, the fire burned warm and steady, casting shadows that danced on the walls like memories, like promises, like the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted when the sun rose that frozen December morning. The winter of 1883 had arrived, cold and merciless and ready to test them both. But in that small ranch house with its cracked door and smoking chimney, something else had arrived too. Hope. Morning came slowly to Silver Creek, the sun hesitant to rise as if it knew what the day would bring. December 21st, 1883. Joe woke stiff in his chair, the rifle still heavy across his lap. The fire burned down to embers. Ayesha was awake, already watching him with those dark eyes that seemed to see more than they should. He stood, worked the kinks out of his back, and added wood to the fire. The routine of it was comforting, familiar. While the flames caught, he put coffee on to boil and started breakfast. Salt pork and johnny cakes, simple food that stuck to your ribs when the cold tried to steal your warmth. Ayesha watched him move around the kitchen with interest. When he brought her a plate, she ate quickly, efficiently, like someone who'd known real hunger. Joe ate standing up, looking out the window at the morning light painting the snow blue and silver. "I need to go into town," he said, more to himself than to her. "Need supplies. Need to let people see my face, remind them I'm not hiding." Ayesha set down her plate, concern flickering across her features. Joe knelt beside her, made sure she was looking at him. "I'll be back by midday, I promise. You'll be safe here. Doors solid, fires stoked, and I'm leaving you this." He pulled a small pistol from his belt, showed her how to cock it, how to aim. Her hands were small but steady as she held the weapon. "Anyone comes through that door that isn't me, you point this at them. Don't even have to shoot. Just the sight of it makes most men think twice." She nodded, understanding the weight of what he was giving her. Trust, protection, the tools to defend herself. Joe pulled on his heavy coat, his hat, his gloves. At the door he paused. "I'll be back, Ayesha. That's a promise." The ride into Silver Creek felt longer than usual. The cold had teeth today, biting through layers of wool and leather like they were paper. But it wasn't the temperature that made Joe's shoulders tight. It was the silence. The too quiet morning that felt like the world holding its breath. Silver Creek looked the same as always. The general store, the saloon, the church with its white steeple reaching toward heaven like a finger pointing at God. But something was different. Joe felt it the moment he rode down Main Street. People were watching. Not openly, not obviously, but he caught the flicker of curtains the way conversations stopped when he passed. Mrs. Henderson, who'd always waved at him from her porch, turned and went inside. Tom Willis, the blacksmith, suddenly found his horseshoes fascinating. Joe tied his horse outside the general store and pushed through the door. The bell above chimed cheerfully out of place with the tension that settled over the room like fog. 3 men stood near the counter, talking low. They stopped when Joe entered, looked at him with expressions somewhere between curiosity and something darker. "Morning," Joe said evenly. "Reed." That was Chester Morrison, the store owner. A good man usually, fair in his dealings, but his voice was cold now, distant. Joe gathered what he needed: coffee flour, sugar, salt. Practical things. He added 2 blankets to the pile, warmer ones than what he had at home. Added a length of good rope for a new clothesline. Added molasses because Ellen used to say sweet things helped the medicine go down. When he brought his items to the counter, Chester tallied them up in silence. The 3 men who'd been talking had moved closer, forming a loose semicircle behind Joe. He could feel their presence like heat from a fire, could hear their breathing. "Heard you found something at your place," one of them said. Jake Miller, a ranch hand from the Peterson spread. Young, stupid, and mean in the way that young, stupid men often are. Joe didn't turn around. "Found a lot of things at my place. It's a ranch. That's where things tend to be. Don't play dumb. The Indian girl. Whole town's talking about it." Now Joe did turn slowly, letting his eyes move across all 3 faces. Jake Miller, his brother Billy. A 3rd man Joe didn't recognize, with a scar running down his left cheek and hands that looked like they'd broken things before. "Her name is Ayasha," Joe said quietly. "And yes, I found her. Tied to my mailbox like livestock, left to freeze. If you know anything about that, now would be the time to speak up." The scarred man smiled. Not friendly, not even human really, just teeth and malice. "Don't know nothing about Indians. They're not my concern. But word is you're keeping her out there, harboring her. That's mighty interesting, Reed. Mighty interesting indeed." "What's interesting," Joe said, his voice dropping to something cold and flat, "is that 3 men would have the gall to stand here and talk to me about a child someone tried to murder while they were busy doing nothing to help." He threw money on the counter, more than the supplies cost, and gathered his parcels. "I'll be going now, but if any of you want to continue this conversation, you know where to find me. Just make sure you come during daylight. I'd hate to mistake you for something that needed shooting." The silence that followed was thick enough to cut. Joe walked out, his back straight, his stride unhurried, but his heart was hammering against his ribs like it wanted out. He was loading his horse when Sheriff Marcus Webb stepped out of his office across the street. Webb was a solid man in his late 40s, with gray in his beard and a limp from an old bullet wound. He'd been sheriff for 10 years, long enough to know when trouble was brewing. "Joe," he called out, "got a minute?" They stood in the street, breath fogging between them. Webb looked tired, like he'd been up all night wrestling with something heavy. "I need to ask you straight," Webb said. "The girl at your place. Where'd she come from?" Joe told him. "All of it. The mailbox, the rope, the note. Ayasha's injuries, her fear, the way she'd been left like garbage for him to find or ignore." Webb listened without interrupting, his jaw working like he was chewing on something bitter. When Joe finished, the sheriff was quiet for a long moment. "That's attempted murder," he finally said. "Clear as day. You got the note still. At home. I'll need to see it. Need to take a statement from the girl if she's able. She doesn't speak much English yet, but she understands more than she lets on. She's smart, Marcus. Quick. And she's been through hell." Webb nodded slowly. "I believe you, Joe. Known you long enough to know you don't lie. But I need you to understand something. Reverend Blackwood's been talking. Been making his rounds visiting folks expressing concern about having an Indian so close to town, using all the right words, hitting all the right fears. Joe felt his hands curl into fists. Blackwood. He's got influence, Joe. Got money and power, and he knows how to use both. Half the men in this town owe him something. A loan, a favor, a blessing at their wedding. He's calling in those debts now, turning people against you. Why, what does he want? Webb shrugged. Could be he just doesn't like Indians. Could be he doesn't like you. Could be something else entirely. But whatever it is, he's making your life difficult. And it's going to get worse before it gets better. Joe looked down the street at the church steeple pointing skyward, at the lie of it, the hypocrisy dressed up as righteousness. I'm not giving her up, Joe said. I'm not taking her to some Indian agent or reservation where she'll just disappear into paperwork and neglect. She stays with me. Figured you'd say that. Webb almost smiled. You're a stubborn son of a gun, Reed. Always have been. But you're going to need help. Can't fight the whole town alone. Then help me. Webb was quiet for a moment, his eyes distant. I had a sister once, Emma. She was 12 when the boys at school started in on her. Called her names, pushed her around. I was older, should have protected her better. But I didn't. Told myself it would blow over. That kids are cruel, but they grow out of it. He paused, his voice rough now. She hung herself in our barn 2 weeks before Christmas. 15 years ago. I found her. Joe didn't know what to say. There were no words for something like that. I won't stand by again, Webb said. Won't watch someone hurt a kid and do nothing. You need help, you come to me. Day or night. Understood. Understood. They shook hands, two men making a pact in the middle of a frozen street, surrounded by people who'd already made up their minds about what was right and what was wrong. Joe rode home feeling like he'd won something and lost something in equal measure. He had an ally now, but he also knew the battle lines were being drawn. When he got back to the ranch, Ayesha was where he'd left her, the pistol in her lap, her eyes alert. She relaxed when she saw him, that subtle release of tension that said volumes about her state of mind. Told you I'd come back, Joe said, unloading supplies. While he put things away, Ayesha pulled herself over to the table, using the furniture for support. She pointed at a piece of paper she'd been drawing on. Joe looked closer and felt something catch in his throat. She'd drawn the 3 men. Rough sketches, but accurate enough, one with a scar on his cheek. She pointed to that one, then made a motion like tying rope, then pointed to the other 2 and made the same gesture. They're the ones who tied you up, Joe said. It wasn't a question. Ayesha nodded. Then she did something else. She pointed to the church steeple she'd seen through the window and made a gesture like someone praying. Then pointed to the scarred man again. Joe's blood went cold. You're saying the man at the church is involved, Blackwood? She nodded, then spoke slowly, carefully. I hear. When they tie me, they say his name. Black. Wood. Joe sat down hard. So it was true. Blackwood wasn't just taking advantage of the situation. He'd orchestrated it. Used Ayesha like a pawn in whatever game he was playing. Why? Joe asked more to himself than her. What does he want? Ayesha pulled the paper closer, drew the ranch, then drew something beneath it, scratching marks into the page with intensity. Below, she said in halting English. They want. Below land. Understanding hit Joe like a physical blow. The land. Something beneath the land. Minerals, maybe. Gold or silver or copper. Blackwood wanted his property and was willing to destroy a girl's life to get it. I'm not selling, Joe said out loud. Not to him, not to anyone. Ayesha looked at him with something like relief, like she'd been afraid he'd give up, send her away to save himself the trouble. Joe spent the afternoon teaching her more English simple words that she picked up with startling speed. He showed her the ranch, carrying her in his arms because she couldn't make it on her own yet. Showed her the barn where he kept the horses, the chicken coop, the root cellar. Showed her the boundaries of her new world. That evening, as the sun painted the snow in shades of amber and gold, Someone knocked on the door. Joe answered with his rifle in hand, but it wasn't trouble. Not this time. Ruth Morrison stood on his porch, wrapped in a thick shawl, carrying a basket covered with cloth. She was a handsome woman in her 40s with kind eyes and work-worn hands. A widow 3 years now, raising 3 boys on her own while running a small restaurant in town. "Mrs. Morrison," Joe said, surprised. "It's Ruth, Joe. We've known each other long enough for first names." She held out the basket. "Brought you some bread and stew. Figured you could use a home-cooked meal." Joe took the basket, still confused. "That's kind of you." Ruth glanced past him, saw Ayasha sitting by the fire. Her expression softened. "That's the girl. Her name is Ayasha. May I come in?" Joe stepped aside, watched Ruth walk straight to Ayasha and kneel down beside her. Not hovering, not pitying, just present. "Hello, Ayasha," Ruth said gently. "I'm Ruth. I live in town. I have 3 boys who'd probably talk your ear off if you let them." Ayasha looked at Joe, uncertain. He nodded encouragingly. Ruth pulled items from her basket. Bread still warm, a jar of stew, a small cloth doll with button eyes. "Made this for my youngest, but he's too old for it now. Thought you might like it." Ayasha took the doll carefully, like it might break, like it might disappear if she held it too tight. Her eyes were shining. Ruth poured coffee for all 3 of them, moved around Joe's kitchen like she belonged there. They sat together, eating bread and drinking coffee, and for a moment it felt almost normal, almost like family. "Most folks in town are scared," Ruth said quietly. "Chester Morrison, my late husband's brother, he's afraid of losing customers if he's seen helping you. Same with others. They're good people, Joe, but they're afraid." "And you're not?" Ruth smiled, sad but determined. "Oh, I'm terrified. Blackwood holds the loan on my restaurant. One word from him and I'm finished. But my husband died 3 years ago from a heart that just gave out. Left me with 3 boys and a business I barely knew how to run. And you know who helped me?" "You did, Joe. You and Ellen both. Brought us food that first winter. Fixed my roof when it leaked. Never asked for anything in return." She looked at Ayasha, then back at Joe. "So if you need help now, if this girl needs help, I'm here. Let Blackwood do his worst. Some things are more important than money." Joe felt his throat tighten. "Thank you, Ruth. That means more than you know." They talked for another hour, Ruth teaching Ayasha simple words: bread, coffee, friend. Ayasha repeated each one, her pronunciation getting better with each attempt. She laughed when she got something wrong, a sound that transformed her face from wary to young. Just a girl, just a kid who should have been worrying about normal things instead of survival. When Ruth left, she squeezed Joe's hand at the door. "You're doing the right thing," she said. "Don't let anyone tell you different." After she was gone, Joe helped Ayasha practice standing again. She managed 30 seconds this time, her face set with determination, sweat beading on her forehead from the effort. When her strength gave out, Joe caught her like he'd done before. "Good," he said. "Real good. Tomorrow we'll try for 40 seconds." That night they sat by the fire together. Joe had pulled out Ellen's old Bible, the one she'd read from every evening. He opened it to Psalms, read aloud slowly, so Ayasha could follow along. "The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want." Ayasha listened, her finger tracing the words on the page, even though she couldn't read them yet. When Joe finished the passage, she looked up at him. "The man. At church. He read this?" "Probably. Most preachers do." Ayasha frowned, thinking hard. "He read this. But he hurt people. God allow—" Joe closed the book carefully. "No, God doesn't allow it. But men hide behind God sometimes. Use his words to justify their own cruelty. Blackwood's not a man of God. He's just a man in a collar." She seemed to understand this, nodding slowly. Then she surprised him by reaching out and touching the Bible, running her fingers over the worn leather cover. "Ellen's?" she asked. "Yes, my wife's. She read from it every night. She good woman. Joe smiled, memories flooding back. Ellen laughing at his terrible jokes. Ellen singing while she worked. Ellen holding his hand during thunderstorms because she was afraid of lightning. The best woman I ever knew. Ayesha was quiet for a moment, then so softly he almost missed it. She like me, I think. If she meet me. Joe felt tears prick his eyes. Yeah, she would have. She would have loved you. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned low, and the temperature outside dropped to bitter cold. Somewhere in the distance a wolf howled. Somewhere closer danger was gathering. But in that small ranch house with its cracked door and smoking chimney, two damaged people had found something neither expected: each other. And in the morning, when the sun rose on another frozen day, they would face whatever came together. Joe fell asleep in his chair again, the rifle across his lap. Ayesha slept by the fire, the cloth doll Ruth had given her clutched in her arms. Neither of them heard the horses that passed by in the night, 3 riders moving slow and deliberate. Neither of them saw the way those riders stopped near the mailbox, looking toward the house with eyes full of malice and greed. But in town, in his warm office, Reverend Silas Blackwood smiled as he counted gold ore by lamplight. Phase 1 was complete. The girl was with Reed. The town was turning against them both. Now came Phase 2, and Phase 2 would be much, much harder to survive. Sunday morning arrived cold and bright, the kind of day where the sun reflects off snow so harsh it hurts to look at. December 23rd, 1883. 2 days since Joe had found Ayesha at the mailbox. It felt like a lifetime. Joe woke to find her already awake, sitting by the window watching the world beyond the glass with an intensity that spoke of old fears. She'd pulled herself there using the furniture, her legs dragging behind her, but she'd done it alone. Progress. "Morning," Joe said, his voice rough from sleep. She turned and he saw she'd been crying. Silent tears that left tracks down her cheeks. In her lap was the cloth doll Ruth had given her, and beside her on the floor was the sketch she'd drawn of the 3 men. Joe crossed the room, knelt beside her. Didn't ask what was wrong, didn't need to. Some wounds were too deep for words, too fresh to poke at with questions. "My mother," Ayesha said slowly, each word carefully chosen. "She make doll. Like this. Before soldiers come." Joe waited, letting her find the words at her own pace. "My father he hunt. Good man. Strong. When soldiers come he fight. They shoot him. Here." She touched her chest. "He fall. Not get up." Her voice was flat now, distant, like she was reading someone else's story. Joe had heard that tone before. Men coming back from war talked like that when the memories got too close. "My mother, she run with me. We run 3 days. Then I fall. From rocks. High rocks. I fall long time. Wake up, cannot move legs. Mama cry. Say I be okay. But I not okay." She looked down at her useless legs, at the body that had betrayed her. "Mama, she carry me. 2 more days. Then she too tired. She put me down. Say she come back. Say she get help." Ayesha's voice cracked. "She not come back. Men come instead. White men. They laugh. Say I broken. Say I joke. Then they tie me. Leave me." Joe felt rage build in his chest like steam in a kettle. Not the hot, explosive kind. The cold, calculating kind that made men do terrible things in the name of justice. "How long ago?" he asked quietly. 6 days, maybe 7. Hard, remember. 7 days. She'd been alone, terrified, injured for 7 days before they'd tied her to his mailbox. 7 days of hoping her mother would return. 7 days of that hope dying a little more each hour. Joe put his hand on her shoulder, gentle. "Your mama didn't abandon you, Ayesha. If she could have come back, she would have. Something stopped her. Something bad, maybe. But she didn't choose to leave you." Ayesha nodded, but her eyes said she didn't quite believe it. How could she, when the last thing her mother had done was walk away? "We'll find out what happened," Joe promised. "When the weather breaks, when it's safer, we'll look for answers. But right now, you're here. You're safe. And I'm not going anywhere." She leaned against him, then just slightly, and Joe wrapped an arm around her thin shoulders. They sat like that for a long moment, two people holding on to each other against the cold, cruel world outside. The sound of church bells drifted across the distance from Silver Creek. Sunday service. The whole town would be there, packed into those wooden pews, listening to Silas Blackwood preach about righteousness and sin while he planned his next move. "You want to know what I think," Joe said, pulling back to look at Ayasha. "I think your mama would want you to fight, would want you to get strong again, to live. You going to let those men win, going to let them turn you into what they think you are." Ayasha shook her head fierce. "Then we work. We train. We make you strong enough to stand up and spit in their faces when the time comes." For the first time since he'd found her, Ayasha smiled. Really smiled. Not polite, not tentative, a smile full of teeth and determination and something that looked almost like joy. They spent the morning on exercises. Joe had her grip his hands and pull herself up, building arm strength, had her push against his palms with her good leg working the muscles that still functioned. The right leg below the knee remained stubbornly still, but Doc Carlson had said there might be some nerve function left. Might be. Ayasha worked until sweat soaked through her shirt and her arms trembled. Never complained, never asked to stop. She had the kind of determination Joe had seen in soldiers, the kind born from having nothing left to lose. By midday she could stand for 45 seconds using the crutch and the wall. Not much maybe, but more than yesterday. And tomorrow would be more still. They were eating lunch, simple beans and cornbread, when the sound of a wagon rattled up the drive. Joe grabbed his rifle, by instinct moved to the window. But it was just Doc Carlson, his medical bag visible in the seat beside him. "Doc," Joe said, opening the door. "Wasn't expecting you." Henry Carlson climbed down from his wagon, moving stiff from the cold. "Figured I'd check on my patient, see how she's healing." He examined Ayasha with professional efficiency, asking questions through Joe when her English failed her. When he finished, he sat back with a thoughtful expression. "She's stronger," he said. "Remarkable, really. Most people with her injuries would still be bedridden, but she's got fight in her." "That she does." Carlson packed his instruments away, then paused. "Joe, I need to tell you something. There's talk in town. Bad talk. Blackwood preached this morning about the dangers of savagery, about protecting Christian values. Didn't mention you by name, but everyone knew who he meant. Let them talk. It's more than talk. After service, he called a town meeting, said there needs to be action taken. Said he's filing papers with the territorial government claiming the girl is a ward of the state and needs to be removed to a proper facility." Joe felt his jaw tighten. "On what grounds?" "On the grounds that you're an unmarried man harboring an Indian child, that it's improper, that her people should be taking care of her, not you." "Her people are dead, Doc. She told me this morning. Soldiers killed her father, her mother disappeared trying to get help. She's got nobody." Carlson nodded slowly. "I believe you, and I'll testify to that if it comes to it. But you need to understand what you're up against. Blackwood has money and influence. He's got half the town convinced you're either a fool or something worse. And the territorial courts, they don't always side with men like us. They side with power." After the doctor left, Joe stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the land he and Ellen had built together. Every fence post, every building, every inch of it had been paid for with sweat and hope, and now someone wanted to take it because of what might be buried beneath. "What you think?" Ayasha asked from behind him. Joe turned. She'd pulled herself to the table, was sitting with her chin resting on folded arms, watching him with those dark, knowing eyes. "I think," Joe said slowly, "that we need to be smart, need to think ahead. Blackwood wants us to react, wants us to make a mistake he can use against us. Then we not make mistake. No, we don't. That afternoon, Joe did something he hadn't done in 2 years. He rode out to see his nearest neighbor, a Crow Indian named Red Hawk, who lived 5 miles west with his extended family. Joe had met Red Hawk years ago, back when Joe was still hunting buffalo, and Red Hawk was guiding white settlers through the territory for money. They'd become friends in the way that men do when they respect each other's skills and keep their promises. When Ellen got sick, Red Hawk had brought medicine made from roots and herbs. It hadn't saved her, but it had eased her pain at the end. Joe owed him for that. Red Hawk's camp was a cluster of hide lodges beside a frozen creek, smoke rising from each dwelling. Children played in the snow, their laughter carrying on the wind. Normal life continuing despite everything the world threw at it. Red Hawk himself was sitting outside his lodge working on a saddle when Joe rode up. He was 62, weathered like old leather with gray in his long braids and eyes that missed nothing. "Joe Reed," Red Hawk said in English, his accent thick but clear. "Been 2 winters since you visit. Thought maybe you forget your friends." Joe dismounted, clasped the older man's forearm in greeting. "Never forget. Just been lost in my own grief for a while." "Grief is like winter. It passes, but it changes the land." Red Hawk gestured to a log beside the fire. "Sit. Tell me why you come now." Joe told him everything. About finding Ayasha, about Blackwood's scheme, about the town turning against them. Red Hawk listened without interrupting, his face impassive, but his eyes grew harder with each detail. When Joe finished, Red Hawk was quiet for a long moment. Then he spat into the fire. "Blackwood," he said, the name sounding like a curse. 5 winters ago he come to us. Say he want to buy land for church, for school, to teach our children white ways. We sell because treaties say we must sell if white man want to buy. He promise fair price, promise papers. Let me guess. No papers, no fair price. Red Hawk nodded. He pay 1/4 what he promise. When we complain, he bring soldiers. Say we threaten him, say we dangerous. We lose land, lose money, lose respect. All because we trust man in black clothes who talk about God. Joe felt the pieces clicking together. Blackwood had a pattern. Find what people valued, use their trust against them, take what he wanted. He'd done it to the Crow. Now he was trying to do it to Joe. "I need help," Joe said simply. "Need allies. Need people willing to stand up and say what he is." Red Hawk looked at him for a long moment, then smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. It was the smile of a man who'd been waiting years for revenge and finally saw his chance. "The Crow, remember. We remember promises made and broken. We remember land stolen. We remember soldiers that come because of his lies." He stood, called out in his own language. Men emerged from the lodges, maybe 10 of them, ranging from 20 to 60 years old. Red Hawk spoke to them rapidly in Crow, gesturing to Joe, explaining. Joe caught some words. Friend. Help. Justice. When Red Hawk finished, every man nodded. "We stand with you," Red Hawk said. "When the time come, we testify. We tell truth about Blackwood, about what he is." Joe felt something loosen in his chest. He wasn't alone anymore. Ayasha wasn't alone. "There's more," Red Hawk said. "The girl you found. Apache, you say? That's what I figure from her features. Apache and Crow, we not always friends, but we are not enemies. Both our people know what it is to be hunted, to be pushed from our lands. If she has no family, she has us now, all of us. Tell her this." Joe rode home as the sun set, painting the snow in shades of orange and purple. When he got back, he found Ayasha had managed to pull herself to the kitchen table and was attempting to peel potatoes for dinner. It was slow, clumsy work, but she was doing it. "You don't have to do that," Joe said. "I want to. I not want to be burden." "You're not a burden, Ayasha. You're family." She looked up at him, potato-forgotten eyes shining. "Family. Family. And I've got news. I went to see some friends today. Crow people. They want to help us, want to stand with us against Blackwood." He told her about Red Hawk, about the stolen land, about the men willing to testify. Ayesha listened, and with each word she sat straighter, looked stronger. "They not know me," she said. "Why they help?" "Because," Joe said, sitting across from her, "sometimes people help each other not because they have to, but because it's right. Your people and the Crow, maybe you have differences, but you've both suffered the same injustices. That makes you allies, makes you kin." That evening they worked on her English again. Joe had her read from Ellen's Bible, sounding out words, asking what they meant. Her accent was thick, but her understanding was sharp. She picked up grammar faster than most children learn to write. "You're smart," Joe said, not for the first time. "Real smart. You keep learning like this, you'll be reading better than half the men in Silver Creek by spring." Ayesha ducked her head, embarrassed by the praise, but pleased. "Ellen teach you read?" "No, my mother did that. Ellen taught me other things, how to be patient, how to listen, how to see the good in people even when they're not showing it." "You miss her?" It wasn't a question. Joe nodded anyway. "Every day, but it's getting easier. Time does that. Makes the sharp edges of grief a little duller." "My mama," Ayesha said quietly. "I miss her too, miss her voice. She sing, beautiful song, about earth and sky and seasons." "You remember any of it?" Ayesha was quiet for a moment, then began to sing. Soft at first, hesitant, then stronger. The words were Apache, the melody haunting and old. It spoke of cycles of death and rebirth, of the land enduring when people could not. When she finished, Joe found he had tears in his eyes. "That's beautiful, Ayesha. Your mama would be proud you remember." "You think she watching from sky?" "Yeah," Joe said. "Yeah, I think she is, and I think she's glad you're safe." They sat together as darkness fell, the fire crackling, the wind howling outside. Somewhere out there Blackwood was planning. Somewhere out there danger was gathering. But in here there was warmth. There was learning. There was the beginning of something that looked almost like hope. Joe showed Ayesha how to load the rifle, how to sight down the barrel, how to squeeze the trigger slowly so the shot went true. She was a natural, her hand steady, her eye good. By the end of the lesson she could hit a target from 20 feet, even sitting down. "Good," Joe said. "Real good. You keep practicing, you'll be able to protect yourself if I'm not here. Where you go? Nowhere right now. But eventually I'll need to. Ranch doesn't run itself, and I want to know you're safe when I do." That night, as Ayesha slept by the fire and Joe kept watch from his chair, he thought about the path ahead. It wouldn't be easy. Blackwood had power and money, and the backing of men who saw the world in simple terms: white versus Indian, civilized versus savage, right versus wrong, with no room for gray. But Joe had something too. He had the truth. He had allies. And he had a promise to keep to a girl who'd been abandoned by everyone else but refused to give up. Outside, the temperature dropped to 30 below. Inside, Joe added another log to the fire and settled in for the long watch. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. Tomorrow Blackwood would make his next move. But tonight, they were safe. Tonight, they were together. And sometimes, in the middle of a Montana winter, that was enough. In town, Silas Blackwood sat in his office and read the response from the territorial court. His petition had been received. A hearing would be scheduled for early January. The girl would be removed from Reed's custody pending investigation. Everything was proceeding exactly as planned. He pulled out a map of Reed's property, studied the marks he'd made indicating where the gold vein ran. Rich and deep, worth more than anything else in Montana territory. Soon it would all be his. He just needed to be patient. Needed to let the law do what violence couldn't. Needed to let good Christian people believe they were doing the right thing while he profited from their righteousness. Blackwood smiled and poured himself another whiskey. To victory, he thought. To gold. To the fools who think mercy is stronger than greed. He drank deep and made his plans while the wind howled outside and the temperature dropped, and somewhere 8 miles away, two people slept unaware of the storm that was coming for them both. December 28, 1883. 1 week since Joe had found Ayasha at the mailbox. The temperature had climbed to a brutal -15, which felt almost warm compared to the past few days. The sky was low and gray, heavy with the promise of more snow. Joe woke to the smell of coffee. For a moment, still half asleep, he thought Ellen was in the kitchen. His heart lifted before reality crashed back down. But when he opened his eyes, he saw Ayasha had pulled herself to the stove, had somehow managed to start a fire and set the coffee pot to boil. She looked back at him, pride written across her face. "I help," she said simply. Joe stood his back, protesting from another night in the chair, and crossed to her. The coffee was terrible, thick as mud and twice as bitter, but he drank it anyway and told her it was the best he'd ever tasted. The smile she gave him was worth the lie. They were eating breakfast when the sound of hoofbeats announced visitors. Joe grabbed his rifle, moved to the window. 3 horses, 3 riders. His gut told him this was trouble before he even saw their faces. Sheriff Marcus Webb was in the lead, but his expression was grim. Behind him rode 2 men Joe didn't recognize. Federal badges glinted on their coats. United States Marshals here on official business. Joe opened the door but didn't invite them in. "Marcus." "Joe." Webb wouldn't meet his eyes. "These are Marshals Craddock and Hayes. They've got papers from the territorial court." The taller Marshal Craddock was a man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and a face that looked like it had been carved from granite. He pulled a folded document from his coat. "Joseph Reed, by order of the Territorial Court, you are hereby ordered to surrender custody of the minor Indian child currently residing on your property. She is to be remanded to the Bureau of Indian Affairs pending determination of her tribal affiliation and proper placement." Joe didn't move. "She's got a name. Ayasha. And she's not going anywhere. Mr. Reed." Craddock's voice was flat professional. "This isn't a request. It's a court order. Signed by Judge Harlan Pierce in Helena. You can comply peacefully, or we can make this difficult. Your choice." "What's the charge? What law have I broken by keeping a child from freezing to death?" Marshal Hayes, younger and clearly nervous, spoke up. "No charges, sir. But Reverend Blackwood filed a petition claiming you lack the legal authority to harbor an Indian minor." The court agreed there needs to be an investigation. "Investigation?" Joe spat the word. "Into what? Into whether I should have let her die? Into whether showing basic human decency is a crime now?" "Joe," Webb said quietly, "don't make this worse. Let them take her to the Indian agent in Helena. If she's got no family, if everything you say is true, they'll give her back. But if you fight this, they'll arrest you. And then where will she be?" Joe looked back at Ayasha. She sat by the fire, watching with wide eyes, understanding enough to know these men wanted to take her away. Her hand had found the pistol Joe kept near her, was resting on it with casual readiness. "Give me a moment," Joe said. "Let me talk to her." Craddock nodded. 5 minutes. Then we're coming in whether you like it or not." Joe closed the door, crossed to Ayasha, knelt down so they were eye level. "They want to take you to Helena, to the Indian agent there. It's the law, they say." "I not go." Her voice was small but fierce. "I know. I don't want you to go either. But if I fight them, they'll arrest me, put me in jail, and then I can't help you at all." Ayasha's fingers tightened on the pistol. "Then I fight." "No." Joe covered her hand with his gently. "Listen to me. We're going to be smart about this. You go with them now, peaceful. I'll follow. I'll get a lawyer, I'll talk to the judge, I'll do whatever it takes to bring you home. But I can't do any of that from a jail cell. They hurt me before. Men like them, they tie me, leave me. These men are different. They're lawmen. And Sheriff Webb, he's a good man. He won't let anything happen to you. Will you, Marcus?" Webb had stepped inside, was standing in the doorway. He looked at Ayasha, and something in his face softened. "No, miss. I won't. You have my word. No one's going to hurt you while you're in my custody." Ayesha looked between them, fear and uncertainty warring in her expression. Finally she nodded. "You promise. You come get me." "I promise," Joe said. "On Ellen's memory, I promise. I will come get you." The ride into Silver Creek was the longest of Joe's life. He followed behind the marshal's wagon, watching Ayesha's small form bundled in blankets, watching her look back at him every few minutes like she was afraid he'd disappear. They took her to the sheriff's office, not the jail, but Webb's own quarters in the back. A small room with a cot and a stove, plain but clean. Better than a cell, at least. "She stays here until the Indian agent arrives from Helena," Craddock said. "Should be 3, maybe 4 days. Weather permitting." "I want to see her," Joe said. "Every day." "That's up to Sheriff Webb. She's his responsibility now." After the marshals left, Webb pulled Joe aside. "I'll take care of her, Joe. I meant what I said. But you need to understand what you're up against. Judge Pierce is friends with Blackwood. Has been for years. This hearing, it's not going to be fair." "Then I'll make it fair. I'll find a way." "How you got money for a lawyer? Got connections in Helena? Got anything except stubborn determination and a good heart?" Joe was quiet. Webb was right. He had nothing. He was a rancher barely getting by, a widower with no family, no influence, no power. "Then I'll get help," Joe said. "There's got to be someone who'll stand up to Blackwood." "Maybe, but you better find them fast." Joe spent the rest of the day in town going door to door asking for help. Most people wouldn't even open their doors. Those who did offered sympathy but no support. "Sorry, Joe. Can't afford to cross Blackwood. Got a family to feed. Got a business to protect." "You understand." He understood. He understood fear. He understood how easy it was to look away when helping meant risking everything. By late afternoon, he was ready to give up. Then he found himself standing in front of Ruth Morrison's restaurant. Through the window, he could see her serving customers, her boys helping clear tables, normal life continuing on while his world fell apart. He pushed through the door. The warmth hit him like a wall, along with the smell of cooking food and coffee. Conversations died as people noticed him. One couple stood and left without finishing their meal. Ruth looked up from the counter, saw him, and something fierce crossed her face. She wiped her hands on her apron and walked over. "Joe Reed," she said loudly, making sure everyone could hear. "You look half frozen. Sit down and I'll get you some coffee and stew. On the house." "Ruth, I don't want to cause you trouble." "Too late. I've been in trouble since the day I opened my mouth about you and that girl. Might as well be worth it." She sat him at a table by the window, brought him food he couldn't taste and coffee he couldn't drink, sat across from him with her own cup. "I heard they took her," Ruth said quietly. "Heard Blackwood arranged the whole thing. Got the territorial judge to sign papers without even visiting your ranch or talking to the girl. I need a lawyer, someone who's not afraid of Blackwood. You know anybody?" Ruth thought for a moment. "There's a man in Helena, Theodore Banks. He does legal work for people who can't afford the fancy lawyers. Charity cases, mostly. My late husband used him once for a property dispute. He's honest, at least. Whether he's good enough is another question." "How do I reach him?" "I'll send a telegram tomorrow morning. Explain the situation. But Joe, even if he agrees to help, how are you going to pay him? These things cost money." Joe looked down at his hands, calloused, scarred, worn from years of hard work. "I'll sell something. The horses, maybe. Some of the land." "Not the land. That's what Blackwood wants. You sell even an acre, he'll swoop in and buy the rest out from under you." "Then what?" Ruth reached across the table, covered his hand with hers. "Then we figure it out. Together. You're not alone in this, Joe. You've just been too proud to see it." That evening, Joe sat with Ayesha in Webb's back room. The sheriff had given them privacy, was out front dealing with the usual Saturday night drunks and fights. Ayesha sat on the cot, her legs tucked under a blanket, the cloth doll Ruth had given her clutched in her arms. She looked smaller here, more fragile, like she was shrinking back into the frightened child he'd found at the mailbox. "How are you doing?" Joe asked. "Scared." "Me too." She looked up, surprised. "You scared?" "Terrified. Scared I'm going to fail you. Scared I'm not smart enough or strong enough to fight what's coming. But being scared doesn't mean we quit." Ellen used to say courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what's right even when you're afraid. Ellen was a wise woman. She was. And she'd be proud of you, Ayasha. The way you fought. The way you keep getting back up. Ayasha was quiet for a moment, then looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "What happened if Judge say I cannot stay with you?" Joe wanted to lie. Wanted to promise everything would be fine. But he'd learned from Ellen that sometimes the kindest thing you could do was tell the truth. "I don't know," he said. "They might send you to a reservation, might try to find Apache people to take you in, might put you in a mission school somewhere. And if I run, if I hide, then we'd both be fugitives. They'd hunt us, and when they caught us and they would catch us, it would be worse for both of us." She nodded, slowly processing this. "So we fight. With law, with words, and with truth, and with every ally we can find." A knock on the door interrupted them. Webb stuck his head in. "Joe, you got visitors out front. Red Hawk and about 10 of his people. They're asking to see you." Joe found them gathered outside the sheriff's office, standing in the snow like they'd been carved from stone. Red Hawk stepped forward, spoke in English for everyone to hear. "We hear girl taken. We come to offer help." "I appreciate it, Red Hawk, but I'm not sure what you can do." "We can testify, can tell Judge what Blackwood is, what he does. We are witnesses to his lies. The judge might not care what Crow people have to say." Red Hawk smiled cold and hard. "Then he show what he is too. And people see. Sometimes Joe Reed, the fight is not about winning, is about making them show their true face." Joe felt something shift in his chest. Hope, maybe, or just the determination to go down swinging if he was going to go down at all. "Thank you," he said. "When the hearing comes, I'll let you know." "We be ready." Red Hawk turned to leave, then paused. "The girl, she Apache. We are Crow. Long time our people not friends, but she is child. And children belong to all of us. Tell her this. Tell her she has family, even if she does not know us." After they left, Joe went back inside to tell Ayasha what Red Hawk had said. She listened, and when he finished, tears were streaming down her face. But she was smiling too, that fierce, determined smile he was coming to know. "I fight," she said. "I stand. I tell them what happened, what men do to me, what Blackwood do." "You don't have to." "Yes, I have to, because if I not fight for myself, who will?" Joe stayed until Webb told him he had to leave, that there were rules about visitors after dark. He stood to go, and Ayasha grabbed his hand. "You come back tomorrow. First thing, I promise." "Good, because I need practice more English, need learn more words, big words, judge words." Joe smiled, despite everything. "All right, I'll bring books. We'll turn you into the best speaker in Montana Territory." He rode home through the darkness, the cold biting through his coat. The ranch felt empty without Ayasha, too quiet, too full of ghosts. He built up the fire anyway, made coffee he didn't drink, tried to eat food he couldn't taste. Tomorrow he'd send that telegram to Theodore Banks. Tomorrow he'd start preparing for the fight of his life. Tomorrow he'd figure out how to beat a rigged system with nothing but truth and determination. But tonight he sat in his empty house and allowed himself to feel the weight of it all, the fear, the uncertainty, the very real possibility that he might lose. Ellen's Bible sat on the table where he'd left it. Joe opened it, not looking for answers exactly, but for comfort, for some reminder that good people had faced impossible odds before, and sometimes they'd won. His finger landed on a passage in Isaiah, "And I will make justice the measuring line and righteousness the plumb line." Justice, righteousness, big words for complicated ideas. But maybe that's what this fight was really about. Not just saving one girl, but proving that justice meant something, that righteousness wasn't just a word preachers used to justify their own greed. Joe closed the book, banked the fire, and tried to sleep. Tomorrow would come whether he was ready or not, and with it, the next battle in a war he hadn't asked for but wouldn't back down from. In town, Reverend Blackwood stood at his window and watched the lights in the sheriff's office, watched Joe Reed ride away into the darkness. Everything was proceeding perfectly. The girl was in custody. Reed was isolated. The judge was in his pocket. A few more days and the Indian agent would take the girl away. A few weeks after that, the court would rule that Reed was unfit, unstable, possibly dangerous. And then the real work would begin, buying the land, mining the gold, building the fortune he deserved. Blackwood raised his glass to his reflection in the window. "To the righteous," he said, "and to the fools who believe in mercy." He drank deep and smiled, unaware that 8 miles away a widowed rancher was planning his own war, unaware that a network of allies was forming, unaware that the girl he'd used as a pawn was sharpening herself into a weapon. The storm was coming. And this time Silas Blackwood had miscalculated who would be swept away when it finally broke. But that revelation was still days away. For now he stood in his warm office counting his gold and planning his victory, while outside the temperature dropped and the snow began to fall, and Montana Territory held its breath for what would come next. December 30th, 1883. The telegram from Helena arrived at Ruth Morrison's restaurant just after dawn. She read it twice, then pulled on her coat and headed for Joe's ranch at a pace that had her boys asking questions she didn't have time to answer. Joe was in the barn when he heard the wagon. He came out, pitchfork still in hand, expecting trouble. Instead, he found Ruth climbing down with a piece of paper clutched in her gloved hand and something like excitement on her face. "He said yes," she announced before Joe could even say good morning. "Theodore Banks. He'll take your case. Pro bono, he says, which means free. Says any case against Blackwood is worth his time." Joe took the telegram, read it himself. The words were simple, but they felt like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. "Will arrive. Silver Creek, Jan 2. Stop. Prepare witnesses and evidence. Stop. Blackwood known to me. Stop. Time to expose him. Stop. Banks. Known to him." Joe looked up. "What does that mean?" "I don't know, but it sounds like they have history. Bad history, if I'm reading between the lines." Ruth was practically vibrating with energy. "This is good, Joe. This is real good. Banks has a reputation. People say he's never lost a case where the truth was on his side." "And when the truth wasn't enough." Ruth's smile faded a bit. "Then he lost with dignity, but he always made sure everyone knew exactly why he lost. Made the corruption visible. That counts for something." Joe folded the telegram carefully, tucked it in his shirt pocket. "I need to tell Ayesha. She should know we have a real fighter coming." They rode into town together, Ruth's wagon rattling over frozen ruts in the road. Silver Creek was just waking up, smoke rising from chimneys, a few early risers sweeping snow from their front steps. Some people waved at Ruth. No one waved at Joe. At the sheriff's office they found Webb making breakfast for Ayesha, eggs and bacon, the smell filling the small space. Ayesha sat at Webb's desk, a book open in front of her, sounding out words with fierce concentration. "Joe?" She looked up, her face lighting. In 2 days she'd already regained some of the color she'd lost. Webb was taking care of her, that much was clear. "Morning. I've got news. Good news." He showed her the telegram, explained who Theodore Banks was, what it meant. Ayesha listened, her eyes moving between Joe and Ruth and the piece of paper. When he finished, she nodded slowly. "So we have champion, someone to fight with words." "Exactly. He'll be here in 3 days. We need to be ready. That means you need to practice telling your story, all of it, in English, clear enough that a judge can understand." "I practice." She gestured to the book. "Sheriff Webb, he helped me. We read. We talk. I learn fast." Webb poured coffee for Joe and Ruth leaned against his desk. "She's a natural, Joe." Picks up grammar like she was born to it. Give her another week and she'll be speaking better than half the cowboys who pass through here. Ruth sat down across from Ayesha, studied her with the practiced eye of a mother. Can I ask you something, dear, about what happened? Ayesha tensed, but nodded. The men who tied you to that mailbox. You said you heard them mention Blackwood's name. Can you remember exactly what they said? Ayesha closed her eyes, thinking. When she spoke, her voice was distant, like she was pulling the memory from somewhere deep and dark. 3 men. They argue. One say it is wrong. Say I am just child. Other man he have scar here. She touched her cheek. He say Reverend Blackwood pay good money. Say job is job. Third man say Blackwood promise more gold if they make sure I not die too quick. Want Reed to find me. Want Reed to take me in. The room went silent. Even Webb, who'd heard the story before, looked shaken by the casual cruelty of it. They wanted you to suffer just long enough, Ruth said quietly. Wanted Joe to be the one to find you. It was all planned. Yes, all planned. I hear Scarman say one more thing. Say Blackwood need Reed land. Say something below ground, shiny, valuable. Gold, Joe said. It has to be gold, or silver. Something worth destroying lives for. We need proof, Webb said. The girl's testimony is powerful, but it's her word against Blackwood's, and he's got half the town convinced he's some kind of saint. Ruth stood abruptly. Then we get proof. Joe, you said you found gold ore on your property. Do you still have it? In the barn, a piece about the size of my fist. Found it when I was digging post holes last month. Didn't think much of it at the time. Bring it to Banks when he arrives, and we need to find those 3 men, the ones who actually did this. If we can get one of them to turn on Blackwood, testify against him, we might have a real case. One of them is Clem Hodges, Webb said. I've arrested him twice for drunk and disorderly. Mean drunk, the kind who likes to hurt things. He's got a scar on his left cheek from a knife fight in Butte. That match your description, Ayesha? She nodded. That him. Clem. I remember name now. They call him Clem. Webb grabbed his coat. I'm going to bring him in for questioning. If he's smart, and he's not, but if he is, he'll realize Blackwood's going to throw him under the wagon the first chance he gets. Better to deal with us than wait for the Reverend to decide he's a liability. After Webb left, Joe spent the next hour with Ayesha, drilling her on English on her story, on how to present herself to a judge. She was a quick study, but every time she had to recount what happened, he could see the toll it took. The way her shoulders would hunch, the way her voice would get smaller. You don't have to do this, he said finally. I can find another way. No. Her voice was firm. I must do this, not just for me, for Mama, for Papa, for all the people who have no voice. I have voice now. I use it. Ruth, who'd been listening quietly, reached over and squeezed Ayesha's hand. You're braver than most adults I know. Not brave, angry. Anger make you strong sometimes. Sometimes, Ruth agreed. But don't let it make you hard. The world's got enough hard people. We need more people like you. People who stay soft even after being hurt. They were interrupted by shouting outside. Joe moved to the window, saw a crowd gathering in the street. Maybe 20 people, and at the front was Silas Blackwood, dressed in his black coat and white collar, looking every inch the righteous minister. Speak of the devil, Ruth muttered. Joe opened the door, stepped outside. Ruth followed, positioning herself slightly in front of him like a shield. Ayesha pulled herself to the window, watching. Blackwood's voice carried clear and strong. Good people of Silver Creek, I come before you with a heavy heart. It has come to my attention that there are those among us who would put their personal desires above the safety of this community, who would harbor elements that threaten our very way of life. He's talking about you, Ruth said unnecessarily. I know. Joseph Reed is a good man, I do not dispute this. But good intentions pave the road to perdition. By keeping that Indian girl on his property, he invites danger. He invites retaliation from her people. He invites the very savagery we have worked so hard to protect ourselves against. A few people in the crowd nodded, but Joe noticed others looking uncomfortable. Mrs. Henderson, who'd turned away from him earlier, was shaking her head. Tom Willis, the blacksmith, stood with his arms crossed, his expression skeptical. The girl is in custody now, awaiting proper placement. This is as it should be. But I ask you, do we want men like Reed making these decisions? Do we want our community's safety determined by one man's misguided sense of charity? That's enough. The voice came from behind the crowd. People turned and Joe felt his heart lift. Chief Red Hawk stood there with 10 of his people mounted on horses, faces impassive. They'd painted themselves for ceremony, and in the morning light they looked like something from another time. Powerful, unmovable. Red Hawk dismounted, walked through the crowd that parted before him like water. He stopped a few feet from Blackwood, and when he spoke his English was clear and deliberate. You talk about savagery, Blackwood. You talk about danger. But who is savage here? Who is dangerous? The child who was left to freeze, or the men who left her? Blackwood's smile didn't waver. Chief Red Hawk, I did not know you were in town. You know now, and I come to tell these people truth about you, about what you are. I am a man of God. You are man of lies. Red Hawk turned to address the crowd. 5 winters ago this man come to my people. Say he want to buy land for church, for school. We sell because we must. Treaties say we must. He promise fair price. Promise papers showing we own other land in trade. Blackwood's smile was slipping now. This is hardly the time or place for business disputes. But he not pay fair price. Pay 1/4 of promise. And papers he give are lies. Show land that is not ours. When we complain he brings soldiers. Say we threaten him. We lose everything because we trust man in black clothes. The crowd was murmuring now, uncertain. Some people were looking at Blackwood with new eyes. These are serious accusations, Blackwood said, his voice tight. Accusations made by people who do not understand our laws, our ways of conducting business. I understand lies, Red Hawk said simply. I understand thief. And I say to you people of Silver Creek, this man is both. He want Joe Reed's land, just like he want our land. And he used girl as weapon to take it. Preposterous, Blackwood sputtered. I have no interest in Reed's land. I am merely concerned for the welfare of that child and the safety of this community. Then why, a new voice called out, did you file papers with the land office in Helena asking about mineral rights on Reed's property? Everyone turned. Theodore Banks stood at the edge of the crowd, having arrived on the morning stage without fanfare. He was younger than Joe expected, maybe 40, with sharp eyes and a bearing that suggested he was used to courtrooms and combat in equal measure. I'm Theodore Banks, attorney at law, and I have here, courtesy of a clerk who owes me a favor, a copy of Reverend Blackwood's inquiry about gold and silver deposits on property currently owned by Joseph Reed, filed 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks before that girl was found at Reed's mailbox. Quite the coincidence, wouldn't you say? Blackwood's face had gone pale. That inquiry was purely speculative, part of my work helping settlers understand the value of their land. Really? Because the letter specifically mentions your interest in purchasing said property should it become available, and it mentions your concern that the current owner is, quote, too sentimental about the land to realize its true worth. The crowd was shifting now, murmurs turning to exclamations. People were looking at Blackwood differently. The mask was slipping. This is a misunderstanding, Blackwood tried. A simple business inquiry blown out of proportion by those who wish to see scandal where none exists. Then you won't mind, Banks continued, explaining why you paid Clem Hodges $50 on December 19th, the day before that girl was found. Sheriff Webb found the receipt in Hodges' room this morning when he arrested him. Hodges is singing like a canary, Reverend, told us everything. How you hired him and his friends to grab an Indian girl, any Indian girl, and leave her at Reed's property. How you knew Reed would take her in. How you planned to use that against him to force a sale. The crowd erupted, people shouting, some in anger, some in disbelief. Blackwood looked around wildly, searching for allies for escape. "Lies," he said, but his voice had lost its power. "All lies." "Then come to the hearing," Banks said calmly. "Come and tell the judge it's all lies. Bring your evidence. Defend yourself. Or run. Your choice." Blackwood looked at the faces surrounding him, saw judgment, saw betrayal, saw the careful construct of his reputation crumbling like sand. He turned and walked away, his black coat billowing behind him, his white collar stark against the gray morning. No one stopped him. No one followed. Joe stood on the sheriff's office steps, hardly able to believe what had just happened. Banks approached, hand extended. "Sorry for the dramatic entrance," Banks said, "but sometimes you need to strike fast and hard before the other side can mount a defense." Joe shook his hand, still stunned. "You just destroyed him in 5 minutes. I exposed him. He destroyed himself years ago. I just made it visible." Banks glanced toward the window where Ayesha watched. "I'll need to talk to her, get her full statement. The hearing is in 2 days. We need to be ready." The next 48 hours passed in a blur of preparation. Banks interviewed Ayesha for hours, gentle but thorough, drawing out details she'd tried to forget. He interviewed Red Hawk and his people, documenting Blackwood's previous frauds. He interviewed Ruth Morrison, Doc Carlson, Sheriff Webb. He interviewed Clem Hodges in his jail cell, and when he emerged, his face was grim. "Hodges gave us everything, times, dates, payments, Blackwood's instructions, all of it, in exchange for a reduced sentence." "Will the judge believe him?" Joe asked. "If the judge is honest? Yes. If he's in Blackwood's pocket like we suspect, it won't matter. But at least the truth will be on record. At least people will know." The night before the hearing, Joe sat with Ayesha in Webb's office. She was nervous, her hands twisting in her lap, her eyes distant. "What if I forget words?" she asked. "What if I say wrong thing? Then you say what you can, in whatever words come. The truth doesn't need perfect grammar, Ayesha. It just needs to be told. What if judge not believe me?" Joe took her hands in his, made sure she was looking at him. "Then we appeal. We fight. We don't stop fighting until you're home where you belong. I promised you that, and I keep my promises." She nodded, but he could see the fear in her eyes, the memory of being helpless, of being at the mercy of people who saw her as less than human. "Listen to me," Joe said. "You are not that girl anymore, the one tied to the mailbox. You're stronger now. You have a voice now. And tomorrow you're going to use it to make sure this never happens to anyone else. Can you do that?" "Yes," she said, and her voice was steady. "I can do that." That night Joe barely slept. He kept thinking about all the ways this could go wrong, about judges who'd already made up their minds, about laws that were designed to protect some people and control others, about the very real possibility that come tomorrow he'd lose Ayesha forever. But he also thought about Red Hawk standing up in front of that crowd, about Ruth Morrison risking her business to help them, about Theodore Banks arriving like an avenging angel with evidence and righteous fury, about a community that had started to wake up and ask questions. Maybe they'd lose tomorrow, but they wouldn't lose quietly. They wouldn't lose without a fight. And sometimes Joe thought that was victory enough. In his hotel room, Silas Blackwood sat in darkness, a bottle of whiskey on the table beside him. He'd underestimated them. All of them. Had thought Reed was just a simple rancher. Had thought the Crow would stay quiet. Had thought his reputation would shield him. He'd been wrong. Tomorrow would tell if he'd been wrong enough to destroy him completely, or if he still had cards left to play. He poured another drink and tried not to think about the prison cell that might be waiting for him when this was all over. January 2nd, 1884. The Territorial Courthouse in Silver Creek was a modest building, barely more than a large room with a judge's bench and 2 rows of wooden seats. But on this cold morning, it felt like the center of the universe. Joe arrived early with Sheriff Webb and Ayasha. She wore a simple dress Ruth had altered to fit her hair braided neatly, her face composed despite the tremor in her hands. Joe had fashioned a pair of crutches for her proper ones, and she'd practiced with them until she could move with something approaching grace. The courtroom filled quickly. Red Hawk and his people took up the left side, sitting in dignified silence. Ruth Morrison sat in front with her 3 boys who'd insisted on coming despite their mother's protests. Doc Carlson was there, Tom Willis the blacksmith, Mrs. Henderson, even Chester Morrison looking uncomfortable but present. On the right side sat Blackwood and his supporters, fewer than Joe expected. The Reverend looked diminished somehow, his black coat less imposing, his white collar less brilliant, like a star that had burned too bright and was now collapsing in on itself. Theodore Banks sat at the plaintiff's table, papers arranged with military precision. He'd been up all night, Joe knew, preparing arguments, anticipating counter-arguments, building a case out of fragments and fury. Judge Harlan Pierce entered at 9 sharp. He was 70 if he was a day, with white hair and a face carved by decades of deciding other people's fates. Joe couldn't read him, couldn't tell if he was friend or enemy, could only hope he was fair. "Court is in session," Pierce announced, his voice surprisingly strong. "We're here to rule on the petition filed by Reverend Silas Blackwood regarding the custody of a minor Indian child currently residing with Joseph Reed. Mr. Banks, you're representing Mr. Reed. I am, Your Honor, and I'd like to start by entering into evidence several documents that I believe will clarify the true nature of this case." Banks stood, moved to the judge's bench with the confidence of a man who'd done this 1,000 times. He presented papers one by one, explaining each in clear, simple language. The land office inquiry showing Blackwood's interest in Reed's property, the receipt for payment to Clem Hodges, the sworn statement from Hodges detailing Blackwood's instructions, the survey report indicating gold deposits on Reed's land. Pierce examined each document carefully, his expression neutral. When he finished, he looked up at Blackwood. "Reverend Blackwood, these are serious allegations. Do you have a response?" Blackwood stood, and for a moment Joe saw a flash of the old charisma, the commanding presence. But it was hollow now, a performance without substance. "Your Honor, I am a man of God. My entire life has been devoted to serving this community, to protecting its values and its people. These documents, they're being taken out of context, twisted to serve a narrative that simply isn't true." "Then explain the context," Pierce said. "Explain why you were inquiring about mineral rights on another man's property. Explain the payment to Clem Hodges." "The inquiry was innocent. I was exploring investment opportunities for the church. The payment to Hodges was for legitimate work, carpentry repairs on the chapel. These men are painting me as some kind of villain when all I've done is try to ensure that an Indian child is placed in appropriate care." "Appropriate care," Banks said, standing. "Your Honor, if I may, the child in question, Ayasha, was found tied to a fence post in sub-zero temperatures on December 20th, left there to die. Mr. Reed saved her life. Since then she's been fed, clothed, given medical attention, and taught to read. I'd like to ask the court what exactly is inappropriate about that care." "The appropriateness isn't in question," Blackwood's lawyer interjected. "A man Joe didn't recognize, probably brought in from Helena. The legality is, Mr. Reed has no legal standing to harbor an Indian minor. That's federal jurisdiction." "Then let's talk about jurisdiction," Banks said. "Your Honor, I'd like to call my first witness, Chief Red Hawk of the Crow Nation." Red Hawk rose and approached the witness stand with the bearing of a man who'd faced worse things than courtrooms. He was sworn in, and Banks began his questioning. "Chief Red Hawk, how long have you known the defendant, Joe Reed 7 winters, since he come to Montana Territory? And in that time, what has been his character in your observation?" "He is honest man, fair man. When my people trade with him, he give fair price. When we need help, he give help. When his woman die, we help him. This is how friends are." "And Reverend Blackwood, do you know him?" Red Hawk's expression hardened. "I know him. 5 winters ago he come to my people. Say he want buy land. We sell because treaty say we must. but he lie about price, lie about papers, take our land and give nothing. When we complain, he brings soldiers." "Objection," Blackwood's lawyer called. "This is irrelevant to the current case." "It's very relevant," Banks countered. "It establishes a pattern of behavior, of using people's trust against them, of taking what he wants regardless of the cost to others." "I'll allow it," Pierce ruled. "Continue." Banks walked Red Hawk through the details of the land fraud, letting the story unfold with devastating simplicity. When he finished, Blackwood's lawyer declined to cross-examine. What could he ask that wouldn't make things worse? "I'd like to call my next witness," Banks said. "Ayesha." The courtroom went silent. Joe helped her stand, handed her the crutches. She made her way to the witness stand slowly, every eye in the room following her progress. When she finally sat down, she looked small and young and terrifyingly brave. "Ayesha," Banks said gently, "can you tell the court what happened to you?" She took a breath, and when she spoke, her English was clear despite her accent. Joe felt his chest tighten with pride. "My name is Ayesha, mean little one. I am Apache. I am 15 winters. 6 months ago, soldiers come to my village. They kill my father. They kill many people. My mother and me, we run. But I fall. From high rocks. My leg break. My back hurt. Cannot walk good after." She continued, her voice steady, telling about the days of running, about her mother leaving to find help, about the 3 men who found her instead, about being tied to the mailbox, about the cold and the fear and the certainty that she would die. Then, man come, Joe Reed. He find me. He cut ropes. He take me to his home. He give me warm clothes, warm food. He give me medicine. He give me hope. "And at Mr. Reed's home were you treated well?" "Yes, very well. He teach me English. He teach me read. He help me stand again. He make me feel like person, not like animal." "Did Mr. Reed ever harm you or threaten you in any way?" "No, never. He only help. He only kind." Banks turned to face Blackwood. "Ayesha, do you know the man sitting at that table, the one in the black coat?" She looked at Blackwood, and something flickered in her eyes. Not fear, anger. "I not see him before I come to town, but I hear his name. When men tie me, they say his name. They say Blackwood pay them. They say Blackwood want Joe Reed land. They laugh, say I am joke, say I am weapon." The courtroom erupted, people shouting, some in outrage, some in disbelief. Pierce banged his gavel repeatedly until order was restored. "That's a lie." Blackwood was on his feet, his composure finally breaking. "She's lying. She's an Indian. They lie. Everyone knows they lie." "Sit down, Reverend," Pierce said coldly. "You'll have your chance to speak." But the damage was done. Everyone in that courtroom had seen Blackwood lose control, had seen the mask slip completely, had seen what he really was beneath the collar and the pious words. Banks questioned Ayesha for another 20 minutes, drawing out details, establishing timelines, building an unshakable narrative. When he finished, Blackwood's lawyer stood for cross-examination. "Miss Ayesha, you claim you heard my client's name mentioned, but you don't speak English well. Isn't it possible you misunderstood, that you heard wrong?" "No, I hear clear. They say Blackwood. They say Reverend. I not forget." "But you were injured, frightened. Your memory could be faulty." "My memory fine. I remember everything. I remember cold. I remember rope. I remember they laugh. I remember waiting to die. Some things you not forget." The lawyer tried a few more questions, but Ayesha was unshakable. She'd lived the story. She knew it in her bones. No amount of legal maneuvering could change that. When she was dismissed, Joe helped her back to her seat. She was shaking now, the adrenaline wearing off, but she'd done it. She'd told her truth. Banks called Doc Carlson next, who testified about Ayesha's injuries and the treatment she'd received. Then Sheriff Webb, who described finding the note at Reed's mailbox and arresting Clem Hodges. Then Ruth Morrison, who spoke about Joe's character and the community support that had formed around him. By noon, the evidence was overwhelming. Even Pierce, who'd maintained his neutral expression throughout, seemed affected by the weight of it all. "Does the defense wish to call any witnesses?" he asked. Blackwood's lawyer conferred with his client, then shook his head. "No, Your Honor, but Reverend Blackwood would like to make a statement." Blackwood stood, and for a moment Joe thought he might try to bluster his way through, but instead something unexpected happened. The Reverend's shoulders sagged, his face crumpled. "I've made mistakes," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Terrible mistakes. I was consumed by greed, by the desire for wealth and power. I saw that land, saw what it could give me, and I lost sight of everything else, my faith, my duty, my humanity." He looked at Ayesha, and there might have been genuine remorse in his eyes, or it might have been another performance. Joe couldn't tell. "That child suffered because of my actions. Others suffered too. The Crow people, Joe Reed, all because I couldn't control my own darkness." He turned to Pierce. "Your Honor, I won't fight this. I won't make excuses. I'm guilty of everything they say. All I ask is that you show more mercy to me than I showed to others." The courtroom was silent. No one had expected this. A confession complete and unvarnished. Pierce took a long moment, then spoke. "Reverend Blackwood, by your own admission, you orchestrated a conspiracy that endangered the life of a child. You attempted to defraud Mr. Reed of his property. You have a documented history of similar fraudulent activities. The law is clear on such matters." He turned to Joe. "Mr. Reed, it is the judgment of this court that you have acted with honor and compassion. The child Ayesha is hereby placed in your permanent legal custody. All petitions filed by Reverend Blackwood are dismissed." Then he looked at Blackwood. "As for you, Reverend, you will be remanded to federal custody to face charges of fraud, conspiracy, and attempted murder. May God have mercy on your soul, because I certainly won't." The gavel came down. The case was closed. The courtroom erupted in cheers. Ruth Morrison was crying. Red Hawk nodded with satisfaction. Ayesha grabbed Joe's hand and squeezed it so hard her knuckles went white. "You're home," Joe said. "You're really home." Outside the courthouse, people surrounded them, shaking Joe's hand, touching Ayesha's shoulder, apologizing for their silence, their fear, their complicity. Mrs. Henderson approached with tears on her cheeks. "I'm sorry, Joe. I should have stood up sooner. Should have been braver." "You're here now," Joe said. "That's what matters." Tom Willis offered to help rebuild the burned section of Joe's barn. Chester Morrison said supplies would be discounted for the next 6 months. One by one, the community that had turned away was turning back, trying to make amends. Red Hawk clasped Joe's forearm in the traditional greeting. "You did good, friend. You fought with honor. Your woman Ellen, she watches from Sky World. She is proud. Thank you for everything. I couldn't have done this without you. We are family now. Your fight is our fight. Your home is our home. This is how it should be." Theodore Banks was packing his papers when Joe approached. "I don't know how to thank you," Joe said. "You saved us. You saved yourselves. I just made sure people were paying attention." Banks smiled. "Besides, taking down Blackwood was deeply satisfying. He's been a stain on Montana territory for too long. About time someone cleaned it up. What will happen to him? Prison, most likely. 10, maybe 15 years if the federal prosecutor does his job. Long enough that he won't hurt anyone else." Banks paused. "You know there will be others like him. Men who see people like Ayesha as less than human, who will try to use the law to justify their cruelty." "I know. But there will also be people like you. People who stand up, who fight back, who remind everyone else that the law is supposed to protect the vulnerable, not punish them for being vulnerable." He shook Joe's hand. "Keep fighting, Mr. Reed. The world needs more people like you." The ride back to the ranch that afternoon was quiet. Ayesha sat beside Joe in the wagon, the winter sun weak but warm on their faces. The snow sparkled like diamonds. The air felt cleaner somehow, lighter. "What you think now?" Ayesha asked. What we do now. Joe thought about it. Now we live, we build, we make a life together. You keep learning, keep getting stronger. And in the spring when the weather breaks, we try to find out what happened to your mother, try to get you some answers. And if we not find answers, then we make peace with not knowing, and we keep going anyway. They reached the ranch as the sun was setting, painting the snow in shades of gold and pink. The house looked small and humble, but to Joe it looked like everything, like home, like possibility. He helped Ayesha down from the wagon, handed her the crutches. She stood there for a moment looking at the house, at the land, at the mountains in the distance. "Is different now," she said. "Everything looked different." "How so?" "Before I see this place and think it not mine, think I am guest, think any moment someone take me away." She turned to look at him. "Now I see home, my home, our home." Joe felt his throat tighten. "Yeah, that's exactly what it is." That night they sat by the fire like they had so many nights before. But this time was different. This time there was no fear, no uncertainty, just the comfortable silence of family. Ayesha had Ellen's Bible open in her lap, reading slowly but steadily. She'd gotten through 2 chapters while Joe mended a harness, the familiar work of ranch life resuming its rhythm. "Joe," she said after a while, "I have question. Ask away. Why you do this? Why you risk everything for me? I am nobody. I am just Apache girl. Why you care?" Joe set down the harness, looked at her across the firelight. "You want to know the truth, the real truth?" She nodded. "When Ellen died, I wanted to die too. Didn't see the point of going on without her. The ranch felt empty. The days felt empty. I felt empty." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "Then I found you at that mailbox. And suddenly I had a purpose again. Someone who needed me. Someone worth fighting for. You didn't save just yourself, Ayesha. You saved me too." She was quiet for a long time, processing this. Then she closed the Bible and looked at him with those dark, knowing eyes. "Ellen was right about you. You are good man. Best man. I'm just a man, trying to do right, sometimes succeeding, sometimes failing." "No," Ayesha said firmly. "You are more. You are proof that people can be good, even when world is bad, even when it is easier to look away. You are proof." 6 weeks later, on a clear March morning, Ayesha took her first steps without the crutches. Just 5 steps from the table to the door, but she did it alone. She fell at the end, but she was laughing. Joe was laughing. Both of them laughing like fools in that small ranch house while the spring sun streamed through the windows. Red Hawk visited once a week, bringing news from the Crow camp, teaching Ayesha about both Apache and Crow traditions, helping her maintain the connection to her heritage. Ruth Morrison came by with her boys, who treated Ayesha like the sister they'd never had. The ranch prospered. Word spread about the gold on Joe's land, but he refused all offers to sell. Instead, he filed proper claims, hired honest miners, and split the profits with the Crow tribe. Reparations, he called it, for what Blackwood had stolen. Ayesha learned to read and write with the skill of a natural scholar. By summer, she was helping Joe with the ranch accounts. By fall, she was teaching English to Crow children. By winter, she was fluent in 3 languages and working on a 4th. The mailbox remained where it was, at the edge of the property, but Joe had carved new words into the post, words that anyone passing by could read. "Here stands a reminder that cruelty can be overcome, that mercy can triumph, that one person's choice to help can change everything." And underneath, in smaller letters, Ayesha's stand, December 20th, 1883. The year was 1923. Spring had returned to Montana once more, 40 winters after that frozen December morning. Joe Reed sat on the porch of his ranch house, now 79 years old, his hair white as the snow he'd once carried a dying girl through. His hands, gnarled from decades of honest work, rested on the arms of his chair. Beside him sat Ayasha. 55 now, her black hair streaked with silver, her face lined with years of laughter and purpose. She walked with a cane these days, her right leg still weak but strong enough to teach 3 generations of children, both Apache and white. Strong enough to stand before judges and legislators, fighting for others the way Joe had fought for her. A young student from Silver Creek had visited that morning, asking about the winter of 1883. The winter everyone still talked about. "Tell me again, Miss Ayasha," the boy had asked, wide-eyed and curious. "About the day Mr. Reed found you at the mailbox." And Joe, with Ayasha's hand resting gently in his, had smiled and begun the story one more time. Because some stories he'd learned were worth repeating, not because they were his alone, but because they belonged to everyone who'd ever needed reminding that one person's choice to help could change everything. Years later, when Joe was old and gray and Ayasha was a woman grown, people would ask her about that winter, about the cold and the fear and the fight for justice. And she would tell them it was the winter she learned what family meant. Not blood, not tribe, not even language or culture. Family was the choice to stand together when the world said you should stand apart. Family was the refusal to let cruelty have the final word. Family was love made visible through action. That was the winter's promise, made in cold and darkness, kept in warmth and light, and it was a promise that would echo through generations long after the snow had melted and the players had all moved on. A promise that said simply this: we are worth saving. All of us. No exceptions. The fire burned low in the hearth. Outside, the Montana night was cold, but clear stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on velvet. Inside, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible circumstances had built something beautiful. Not perfect, never perfect, but real and lasting. And that was more than enough. That was everything.